to unpack today, so let's get started.
Let's do this.
Welcome to the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education weekly.
I say good morning, Lisa. Back from the number one spot. Good morning, Daman. So happy to see you.
Daman.
Dean, last week was a big week for Deigan. If you want to just run down, how did last week go?
You know, it was amazing. We had Terry Bradshaw speak on the last day. He was surprisingly entertaining. You know, a lot of these guys on the speaking circuit, you know, they kind of have canned presentations. Really entertaining, seriously entertaining. I'm not a huge NFL guy, but he was really good and entertaining. We had Michael Rogers, who's a futurist, talking about the future. And he talked about autonomous trucking. The thing that I liked was they called them something glasses. Like there's glasses you wear, right? And it basically projects your iPhone out in front of you on a head-up display. And,
Google Glass back in the day.
Yeah.
And I thought one of the things that Michael said, and I really resonated with this, because he said, what I want to be able to do is walk down the street and ask my iPhone what's their name, and have the machine recognize the face and it pops up, because I'm awful at people's names. And then, of course, you want the next bit, which is don't engage.
Just like
right. Yeah, don't engage.
Yeah. So, but then we had all our brokers, shippers, and carriers. We had a broker customer advisory board. It was the first time in 2 years we'd had all of our users in. I was really surprised at how open, honest, and engaged all of our brokers were. Our carriers and shippers were there for the first time. And the other thing was how much they've enjoyed listening to shows like this, our IQ show, your show, how much it's helped them understand the industry better. So that was sort of our big takeaway, but just a really successful week for us. But
Nice.
and a lot of some of the bigger brokerages have asked me to come out and meet with them and spend some time on the floor, helping some of the the operators in the brokerages understand the market a little bit better, especially as we see the market from a spot market perspective.
That's awesome.
I think Jeff, you and I need to do a road trip out there next year. Deigan, he'll be you and I, man. Let's make it happen.
Yeah.
Lots of barbecue. Austin's a nice place.
Yeah, we gotta get some barbecue. Like as long as it's not cold, you know, I'm about it, because we're about getting some frigid temperatures here in Toronto. So
it was hot. And it was 90 degrees. Yeah.
See, I'm jealous, man. I'm jealous. So, Dean, we're talking a bit off stage about some really important news in terms of what you're seeing in terms of like the spot. Let's get into it. Exactly what you're kind of seeing.
I saw something on Sunday in our data that got me thinking about our show and everyone that listens, especially those that are sort of actively, buying capacity, or more importantly, building relationships with shippers, right, that may not have thought about non-asset providers before. And we've covered it a little bit on the show. One of the trends we've seen in the last year in particular is a lot more mini bids. But as a result of the really tight capacity last year, I think a lot of shippers found that non-asset players were a really good source for contract freight. Because normally the contract freight goes to the asset-based carriers for the most part, right? But what we saw last year was a shift away from that and more towards, the brokerage logistic providers doing more of that contract freight, as opposed to falling through the routing guide and out into the spot market because no one wanted it.
That's what I'm doing.
Yeah. So one of the things on our load board, we've been seeing, so load posts in our dry van spot market were over $1 million for the fourth week in a row. Sorry, $1 million. A lot more than that. 1 million loads for the fourth week in a row. So I thought, now, okay, so what was it like before the pandemic started? Because we've been averaging 1.2 million dry van load posts a week since June of 2020.
Wow.
So that got me thinking. So there's been a shift, and I thought, well, okay, if the shift was pandemic related, what was it before? Before it was half that, going back to 2015.
Right.
So the average from 2015 to when the pandemic hit was only something like 610,000 loads a week. As soon as the pandemic hit, the number of loads going, because capacity is tight, and admittedly, there is some double posting going on. There are some brokers that post loads multiple times. But again, it's a valid data point because if it's done consistently, it's a really good indicator of market behavior. Because a lot of people criticize that, but it's actually a really solid data point. So you think about, we've not seen any decrease in our load posts, around that 1 million loads per week mark, which tells me that this is stuck. So the volume of freight moving to non-asset players in the spot market is sticking. And what shippers are doing, the fundamental change, and I don't know how many of our listeners understand routing guides and waterfall theory and spot contract, but just if we could spend a minute, maybe just sort of, summarize that. A lot of shippers will have contract freight where they go out to bid. Jeff will put in a bid on a lane for a shipper. Carriers will agree to haul it for a certain rate. Typically, it's the lowest rate at the top of the routing guide. Picture an Excel spreadsheet with a lane, an origin destination, loads per week, and the rate per mile. So the cheapest carrier is at the top, the next expensive is underneath, and so on. So you waterfall down. Some carriers reject those loads. In the pandemic, we saw carriers only accepting 75, 80% of those loads that were tendered out through technology called EDI. So EDI, it's an automatic data transfer between TMS systems where the load gets tendered out to the market. And carriers that are in the routing guides can reject or accept those loads. So when capacity is tight, they accept fewer. Right now, it's probably more like that's accepting about 90% of loads, maybe 95% of loads. No. So what's happened typically, and Jeff, you follow on with how it works on the spot side, I think. But what we see is typically people would go out to bid and put every single lane in the bid. If it's a lane that's got one load a year, it's in the bid. And Jeff's wasting a lot of time trying to find the rate per mile on a lane that may have zero volume. We found that about 30% of our lanes were ghost lanes. No freight ever moved. And then we dug a little bit further and found that about 80% of all of our contract volume moves on just 20% of the lanes. So there's a lot of lanes where there's very small volume. And what that invites is a service failure from the carrier. So the carrier, if it's a really low volume lane, they're more likely going to, reject that load. And then it falls through the routing guide out into the spot market. And that's typically how it works broadly. So I did a story with Journal of Commerce a few weeks ago, and we talked about it at DatCon and on our show yesterday. And I think what shippers are doing is they're engineering in more routing guide compliance. And by that, I mean, if you don't put in all of those volatile lanes where there's not a lot of volume and they're prone to being rejected, if you don't put them in the first place, your compliance levels go up because you've got fewer loads being rejected by carriers. So what you've got is this sort of deliberate shift in how freight is being tendered into the market. You'll have more compliance on the contract side with less volume, but it's most of the volume. And then the other 20% of the volume that's on 80% of the lanes is going out into the spot market automatically, direct to the non-asset community. And I think I was thinking about this yesterday, and I thought, what a great sales opportunity for all of us on the call, because it means there's more volume in the spot market. Shippers are looking for more solutions for those lower volume lanes. So I think from a sales perspective, it's about where you pitch yourself. Are you in the massive shipper space, or is your niche, moving with shippers that move a few loads a week? So that's where I sort of landed on our data on Sunday. It's definitely a trend that's starting to solidify. It's gone from something that was happening during the pandemic that you could say, well, that's just pandemic driven. It's been a solid trend for the last 12 months now. And I think that's what we're certainly hearing it from shippers at DatCon last week. That's what they're doing. One of the things, and I'll repeat what we said on the show yesterday, we had I'm going to say 100 shippers in the room on Wednesday last week. And we asked them, we said, so before the pandemic, how many of you had a broker as one of your solution partners? And 4 people put up their hand. Wow. And then we said, so today, how many of you have a broker 3PL on your books who's a partner you engage with every day? Everyone put up their hand.
Wow.
It was a big shift. Every one of our shippers said they are actively working with non-asset providers for solutions to their freight. And I think that just shows you how good we are at making things happen and being good solution providers. But it means that shippers are looking to this community a lot more than they did before the pandemic came along.
And one thing I've noticed, Dean, is that me being Canadian, is that I've always been in this industry for 6 years. I find like the American shippers, they're more asset driven. That's always the first question they ask, whether it be a cold call or email. Hey, are you asset based? Give me your MC or your SCAT code. Let's go from there. But I find like in Canada, they're looking for partners. I've never had issues on the Canadian side, but maybe it's just because it's different, right? Like we were talking to a big shipper in Canada yesterday, and their background is that they went from customer service to logistics. Like they didn't kind of like study logistics maybe like in the States or anything like that. So you're so right by saying that, because that's the number one thing I see making these calls daily is like, first thing, if it's American, what's your SCAC and what's your MC? Are you asset based? And there's ways to kind of get around those objections, but those are the first things they ask. Jeff, maybe you can kind of go into that a little bit more because of what you see being in the States as well.
Yeah. And to go back to what Dean was saying about bids and the waterfall effect and all of that, what I did many years ago is that when you did a mass bid for all your lanes, you would get those contracts back and they would be an annual bid. I do things a little bit different. So when I go out to my carriers and I give them the opportunity to bid, I tell them right up front, hey, listen, this is the rate that I'm looking for right now. We're going to revisit. We're going to watch that market. We're going to watch the contracts. We're going to watch the spot market and see what happens. If there's a huge fluctuation in the market, we're going to discuss this a little bit further between us as well as the shipper so that we're all on the same page. Those are the type of conversations that you have to have, because guess what's going to happen? If you don't have those discussions and you have a smart shipper, they're going to start looking as well. If they find a cheaper option or something like that, guess what they're going to do? They're going to jump ship. So you want to beat them to the punch and have that conversation like maybe every month or every 6 weeks, but you got to have your finger on that pulse to see what's happening out there to do that. That's the big change from the annual RFP to a short-term RFP to even shorter, because you have to be on top of that almost daily because it's swinging all over the place. So that's the biggest difference that I'm seeing right now, and it's working for me. It may not work for others because they have a different approach, but that's pretty much it.
And that's why you've got to watch the spot market rates, right? A lot of people say, why should I care about spot market? It's only a small percentage of the volume of loads move. Well, directionally, it sets the trend for where contract rates go. Where spot goes, contract will follow, something like a 4 to 6 months.
It starts that drawdown effect. And the other thing too, you were talking about ghosting, and I started to smirk a little bit. What a lot of shippers do is that they go out there and they test the market. They want to see where their rates need to be, right? So they don't have a lane. They just throw out A to B and this state and that state, and then they'll see what comes back, and then they'll be like, They get the calls and they're like, oh, this is covered. It was never a shipment out there. They're doing a lot of market testing out there. A lot of them are out there. They're it's like, is the water warm enough? They put their little toe in there and see what the temperature is, and then it's like they back out real quick. Those are the long type of shippers. And throwing those one-off shipments, and we spoke about that weeks ago, Dean and Ryan, they shouldn't even be part of that bid. I don't even know why they do that. And coming from that side of the business, and I say it all the time, if a traffic manager and a logistics manager knows exactly what they're doing, sitting in that seat, they're not going to do the one-off. They're going to find that niche carrier to cover that once a year kind of lane.
Yeah, as Jeff's have connection, and it's so right. Like as we were talking, just to that point, is that even for my personal self, like when we get an RFP or routing guide, we don't touch those. We don't touch those one lane or anything like that, unless it's a crazy fit for us. But yeah, Jeff, continue with
Yeah,
28
yeah.
lanes.
Sorry about that. That's why I'm getting the geek squad over here.
You said that
Yeah.
yesterday.
So the thing is that doing that, it just shows the service providers and the carriers that you're not the real thing if you're throwing those kind of things out there and not really paying attention to where the meat and potatoes is, right? Where is your revenue? How are you going to take your carriers that are this wide and narrow it down instead of dividing up all your revenue over across many different service providers? More revenue, better discounts, less revenue, higher cost. So, and it's that control factor too. It's the risk factor. It's the control factor.
Yep.
So you got to really pay attention to what you're doing, especially on the transportation management side of it. Is that if that's your niche and what you like to do as a broker, or whatever you want to call yourself, that's where you really need to concentrate on and make your shippers aware of that it's hurting them. It's not benefiting them whatsoever.
The other thing to keep in mind, though, is when you start to chase price, you compromise service typically, right?
Yep.
Especially in the spot market. So I think if those of us that are, selling capacity and providing solutions for shippers, always remember that it's, there's always a compromise when it comes to lowering costs.
But there's one thing, Dean, too. There's one thing, and there is such a thing called the diamond in the rough. If you happen to find that carrier that's looking for that lane, specific lane, because they need a backhaul or something from it, right? You're going to get that cost that you need, and you're going to get that excellent service as well. So keep that in mind. It's very hard and difficult to find that, but when it does happen, jump on that. Definitely.
For a lot of shippers that will just go straight to a broker, and then it's any carrier that comes along that happens to be there. That's a bit of a crapshoot. You don't know who you're getting. Do they have the right level of insurance? Do they have exclusions on their policy that exclude that commodity? There's a whole lot of stuff you've got to consider when it comes to
right. I mean, CSA scores. Carrier Assure, Cassandra Gaines, right? She started that up. I mean, the Carrier 411. I mean, you could just go right down the list, right? You got to dot the I's and cross the T's and do your homework on these things. Just because a carrier is available doesn't mean you have to give them the load because you're in a bind. It's going to hurt you. You don't know if they're going to double broker or take the load or whatever. So just don't hand out your shipments to the unknowns. It's gonna kill you. One time, that's all it takes. Just one time, and you're done.
Well, we were talking about the holiday on Monday, right? Like, you don't want to be stuck on a long weekend. But Dean, to come back to it, like, it's really important to have that conversations with the carriers, especially the new ones, because on your show yesterday, you guys mentioned that, I believe like it was like September, supply is up, for truck orders, right? So new players are going to be coming in, bigger players are going to be adding to their fleet. So it's really important to understand that.
Well, so it's interesting that a lot of large fleets, capacity started to come online. We had the most number of new trucks ordered ever in September. All the order books were open, right? So there's large truckload carriers are either very bullish on what 2023 looks like, or they're going to replace a lot of their older trucks. They've had to run longer because they couldn't get trucks last year. So if the net is no change, then that means that all of those trucks they're going to start putting into the used truck market will drag down used truck prices and flood that market. And then and I asked a guy the other day why, we had 9,000 new carriers and 26,000 new trucks enter the market in September. Jeez. And it's been like that for the last 3 months, which you'd say that's nuts. Like, what are people looking at? And one of the carriers I called, he said prices are coming down, and he was getting 0 down finance at last year's rates to lease more trucks. And this is, again, I checked this with some finance people, and they said that doesn't sound right. But my friend is buying 3 trucks because he's got some good contract freight in the reefer space, and the payments are legitimate. I've seen the documents. So you would say, why are people coming back into the market? Prices are coming down. So as used truck prices come down, barriers to entry decrease. Insurance is still high. But the other thing, of that 26,000 trucks and 9,000 carriers that got a new DOT authorization, we don't know how many of those are hotshot guys and how many are box trucks and how many are Class A trucks. And I was talking to a good friend of the show, Nicole Glenn, who's the CEO of Candor Expedite, at DatCon last week, and it was a really interesting discussion about how much volume has stuck in the LTL space. You know, as shippers have found solutions instead of going through LTL. Nicole spoke on our IQ show about the fact that, you know, shippers are very anxious about, you know, getting damages by having multiple handling of consignments through the LTL network. If you go to a hotshot type LTL situation where it's picked up once and dropped once, even if it's a multi-drop load, it's probably a better solution. So there seems
especially on the high risk, especially on the high risk. I mean, the low risk, whatever. High risk, you don't want all those hands touching in a different terminal.
Don't have the data. We don't have the data that says how many dualies have been sold, right? So the class 4 and the class 3 and 4, we don't know. It's sort of, you know, Act Research, who's our partner, capture class 5, 6, 7, and 8 trucks, but we really don't know. Has there been a disproportionate growth in, you know, diesel-powered V8 dualies hauling hot shots all over the country? Anecdotally, I think there has been, but I have no way to prove that we are seeing more smaller carriers. When I say smaller, more carriers enter the market with smaller equipment. It's more nimble, smaller. We've also seen a lot more carriers enter the market with, you know, box trucks and sprinter vans where you don't need a CDL to avoid the drug screening that came in January 2020. So it feels like, you know, the class 8 big truck market, it feels like it's static. But but on the other end of the market, I think there's incredible growth that I'm desperately trying to figure out a way to put some numbers around what that growth looks like, especially on the smaller straight truck, box truck, sprinter van side of the industry. So overall, what it looks like is shippers have found a way to move smaller consignments more efficiently with maybe better solutions. So, you know, for those sort of listening to the call, it's not always about a 53-foot 18-wheeler. You know, to move freight, even though as a truck, if I'm a carrier, you know, if I can build a full truckload of 10 consignments in refrigerated, I'm making a lot of money per mile. So, you know, there's certain niche you can get into, but maybe there's an opportunity out there for shippers that are looking for the consignment that's not a full truckload.
Right. I mean, even the load to ride option, right? On a full truckload, almost like zone skip, right? You load it into the nose of that truck and it sits there from the east to the west and they're loading up everything. We used to do that a lot for the simple reason, those touch points, you know, every dock that they go up to, they have to take the freight out, touch it. There's a high probability that you're going to have a claim or damage every time they touch it. So if you can find that, you know, that service provider, that carrier, that you can do a load to ride, that it sits there in the nose and never gets taken out until it gets to their delivery terminal, that's the way to go on, especially those high risk ones. But I wouldn't suggest, you know, I mean, how many times from east to west does an LTL carrier touch a dock?
I think it's 6 is the average. It's the average.
That's exactly my point, right? Yeah. I mean, you know, not every cross dock works the same, and then you've got these high-strung, high-stress forklift drivers that got to move the freight from one side of the building to the other side of the building, you know, to go to Carolina or New Jersey or whatever. And some of them, they take those skids. I've seen it because they have to load fast. They'll have one skid sitting here. They'll take the other skid on the forklift. They'll tilt it like this to hit the thing so they can ride it over the load leveler to push them all in there. But guess what happens? Sometimes it sits up. That pallet hits the boxes, pushes the boxes, damages, because that's the stuff you want to try to avoid. I mean, it happens all the time when the rubber hits the road.
The reason I got thinking about this, during DatCon, we had an hour spare and I went up to the I-35 and I sat under the overpass. And so nobody could see me, but I just love watching trucks. And of course, I-35 out of Laredo up through Austin and San Antonio to Dallas is like a conveyor belt. It is unbelievable how many trucks run that lane. And of course, I'm seeing all of the, you know, the Mexican-based carriers with the huge numbers on the side of the truck. Like it's a number that's like a foot high, and they'll have 3 of them. They're very distinct, and they've got a lot of chrome and stainless on them. And then there's a lot of older equipment. There's just a disproportionate number of freight liners running up and down for some reason. But the one thing that stood out were all of the hot shots. There were guys with the gooseneck trailer, the tandem axle. Was one guy, and I was just thinking exactly about what you're talking about, Jeff. He had 5 skids of axles for a trailer axles. And of course, people like Hyundai get their trailers made in Mexico. So they were trailer axles. He had 2 or 3 skids of air conditioning frames that were, you got to be careful with that lightweight aluminum stainless type product. And then there were a few skids up front, and it wasn't tarped. And I just thought, that's half a truckload right there.
Yeah.
Wow.
You would, to consolidate that into a van, it borderline impossible. Like you couldn't. It was ugly. You couldn't stack anything, right? But I thought for a shipper, that's a really good way to move freight, low cost, quick, efficient, no damage. Then I started watching how many of these there were. Now, it's one data set, right? It's one person sitting on the side of an interstate. But it's something I've noticed over time is that there's more and more people doing this. Even if you just follow social media and you watch truckers in big trucks complain continuously about hotshot guys taking up a tractor trailer space at a parking lot. They're entitled to. They've got a DOT number. They've got to sleep. But these guys, a lot of truckers get very angry because they think they're taking work away from them, the hotshot guys. There's a lot of aggro out there on the highways over this, but it's a sustainable trend, I think, for a lot of carriers.
Well, it's the old adage, eat or be eaten.
Yeah.
And then you look at in TV shows as well, like Shipping Wars. I don't know if you guys have ever watched Shipping Wars, but everyone on there has like a gooseneck or they have like a hot shot, right? So you see things like this, and then they see there's websites like YouShip, and it's like, hey, I can go get these loads and things like that. Like, why not eat, right? So that definitely is playing into it, and I can see it. Like everybody has a truck these days, I feel like, so.
Right.
Yeah. Dean, I want to ask you something. I know we're about 2 weeks after the aftermath of Hurricane Ian.
Yeah.
I know personally yesterday we booked out a load of seafood from Atlantic to Miami. It was supposed to move this week. Because of capacity, we had to go and book it for late next week, just based on what they're kind of telling us that they're all trucks. We have 3 or 4 carriers that we kind of go to. Everybody was at capacity for this. So what are you kind of seeing in terms of the numbers and everything like that in terms of the aftermath?
Yeah, dry van. So I could do each equipment type. So what we saw the week prior to, remember we talked about this on the show, the week prior to Ian making landfall, we saw a lot of dry van freight getting staged in markets north of Tallahassee, so Tifton, Macon. So load posts were up, spot market volume was surging into southeast markets. Hurricane made landfall. As soon as it passed, we saw a lot more volume then start to move into that, the 4 markets in Florida. So if I can just, inbound load posts were up 22% last week. That's a fairly sizable jump in spot market volumes into Florida. Lakeland was the hardest hit market. Load posts were up 27%. A lot of that volume came from Atlanta. When we look at where the loads originated, number of loads moved, not loads posted, loads moved were up about 3% on that one lane last week. Spot rates are up to $3.33 a mile. That's Atlanta to Lakeland. That's 18 cents a mile higher than the September average. But so what we were seeing was the volume started to trickle in, the spot market volume in particular, which meant carriers were having access to the market. It's interesting, Ryan, I spoke to carriers who were loading in there the day after. They were unloading the day after Ian made landfall in Florida. So I'm not sure how much disruption there was, for a lot of carriers that could get in and out, without going into those hard hit areas that were flooded. So, and on the refrigerated side, load posts are up last week. Load posts in the reefer side into Lakeland were up like 130% last week. There was a lot of volume, which speaks to why I think you're having trouble trying to find capacity on the reefer side. A lot of that volume came from Dallas. Memphis was a lot of volume came from Memphis. That's a big logistics hub. They call it the logistics hub of America. Flatbed rates are up also out of Memphis. There was a lot of movement in lanes last week, in particular, trying to get freight into that area. Again, it's a tough market to get out of. Every
yeah.
I think carriers instinctively add in the backhaul to the head haul rate to get back to another market.
It was deadhead miles.
And I looked at loads moved. These aren't loads posted, but in Florida, double the loads go in versus out. So it's a strong backhaul market. And Lakeland, it's even stronger. Lakeland, including Orlando, is the biggest spot market in Florida. More than double the loads come in versus go out. So for a carrier, they're always looking for capacity. Rates are much lower. The needle didn't really move outbound. Loads north, the rates didn't go up because of the imbalance. There's not a lot of freight, so people aren't chasing loads necessarily. So that's sort of the wrap up there. One of the questions we had this week was why didn't it move the national rate average? And it's because it's a consumer market. The 4 markets in Florida are relatively small compared to the larger freight markets like Atlanta, Chicago, Los Angeles, Elizabeth, New Jersey. It didn't move the needle. We predicted that last week. It's just as tragic as it was, it didn't create the imbalance nationally that we would have thought, because geographically it's a long peninsula with like 2 or 3 roads in or out. And it's a relatively small market. So a lot of regional disruption, but not a lot of impact nationally. You've got to remember that we've still got a lot of, I won't say a lot, we are oversupplied in terms of capacity in the industry. I wouldn't say, really oversupplied, but we definitely have more trucks than loads. I think that's a given. And you've only got to look at in mid-September when the rail strike was, talked about, when I think it was September 16, the moratorium ended, or the whatever they call it. It's interesting that there's still talks of it going on. They still haven't ratified that agreement, so the possibility of a rail strike still exists. But if you remember, we were talking to some of our shippers, and before that Friday midnight deadline, they on that Monday started to shift their spot market volume from intermodal or contract volume from intermodal to the truckload spot market on Monday of that week. So you would have thought, wow, the threat of a national strike, lots of shippers would be moving volume away from intermodal so it doesn't get tied up in the rail network if there's a strike. Didn't move the national needle because contract carriers had enough capacity to handle the extra intermodal volume. It didn't spill into the spot market. So that told me that there was still a lot of capacity in the market to absorb volume surges regionally, and it just didn't materialize like, that 16 cents per mile jump we saw when the polar vortex hit. That was a 16 cents a mile jump in a week. So we that wasn't what we thought would happen. Rates have kind of plateaued though. Like, it's interesting, our long-term forecast for rates out to into November before we see the seasonal effects has got rates holding flat on the spot market. It's a really interesting trend that we're seeing emerge. So we're into that. Of course, we've got Black Friday sales happening 6 weeks ahead of Black Friday. So we've got Amazon having a Prime Day for the first 2 in a year for the first time ever. That ends today. Nike reported last month that their inventories in the second quarter were up 44% over last year. So I think there's a lot of retailers have got a lot of inventory that's already been moved by trucks into warehouses. And I think we'll all have some pretty good deals this year when it comes to our shopping. But these are really interesting times, right, in terms of all this inventory that's been built up. Imports, I just looked at our imports yesterday. Imports for September are up about 1% month over month, right? Sorry. Start again. Down 8% month over month, up 1% compared to this time last year. So volumes are cooling. There's no question volumes are cooling. But one of the things that stuck out, and this is a theme that, Jeff, we've talked about for a long time, is the west to east coast shift. There's been a lot of freight moving away from the west coast. Year over year, east coast volumes are up 10%, west coast down 11%. But the Gulf Coast, right? Gulf Coast up 28%.
Wow.
And so what you're seeing, and I counted the ships waiting to unload in Mobile and Houston this morning, 32 in Houston and 16 off Mobile.
That's just unbelievable.
These aren't huge ports in terms of volume, but it just shows you when you're thinking about where you buy capacity and solutions for shippers, we've seen this effect where freight has moved around to the Gulf Coast. And if you just go onto the Port of Houston and the Port of Mobile, Mobile Port yesterday were talking about their new 100-foot high ship-to-shore crane that they've got operating. Well, what does that mean? It means you can have bigger ships, taller ships. You can unload them faster. So I think you'll see more volume coming in. The big question is, does it stick? And I think if we provide good capacity and solutions and good rates, then maybe shippers do stick with that. So the west to east trend continued. In Houston, it was interesting. Houston's volumes up. They've got about a 7% market share of the total market. So it's not a massive port, but a 28% increase year over year. That's significant. Mobile is like only a 1% market share, but volumes are up 40% year over year. So,
and what was that? What was that percent, Dean, last year in Houston at this time?
Okay. So year over year, it's up 28% year over year. I don't have 2020's data. I'd have to go and pull that from the database to answer that question.
It just goes to prove, like, people are changing the way they do business.
Yeah.
Another thing that I looked into is that the transloading cost from west, right? Like Houston compared to LA, I have cheaper rates for transloading coming out of Houston than there are in LALB for sure.
Really?
Oh yeah. We've been doing some analysis on that and looking at the differences of the possibility of pulling in freight going into LALB compared to Houston, and then the cost difference. And we were kind of shocked. I mean, because first of all, it's the volume and space availability at these warehouses on the West Coast that are still very, very high. So they don't have the space. So they're charging premium rates to do the transloading compared down to Houston, where we found that there are a lot more opportunities for transloading compared to out there. So it's interesting.
You've got a fairly decent, you've got to get the freight from the port to the transloading facilities, right? So that's typically a dray move to the Inland Empire or a rail move.
Yep.
How close to the transload facilities in the Port of Houston? Are they literally there in the port?
We have a few of them that are in close proximity, within 20 miles. I mean, not far at all.
Dray.
But we just found that interesting, when we're doing bids and looking at different options. We found that, and that may be one of the reasons why shippers are transferring that freight from LALB into Houston. I'm not sure about Alabama or into Savannah. I can't answer that, but I would assume that the rates are down, especially on the transloading side.
Yeah, interesting. Well, Houston's one of our largest spot markets for dry van, reefer, and flatbed. It's more of an outbound market, so capacity is sort of always tighter in that market than any market. So it's not like Florida, right, where you've got more loads coming in than out. It's almost the reverse in Houston.
Well, something. Let's face it. That's always been the case into Florida or up into New England area. There's more freight going in than there is coming out. And now you have to look at, you're talking about the backhaul opportunities and the deadhead miles. I mean, a lot of these guys, depending upon where they're going into Florida, are going to deadhead up into the Atlanta area to get that freight. So they blend that all into the cost of doing business because they're not going to do it for free. Somebody's got to pay for it, right? So it's always been like that for decades, though.
Right. So the trend, it's interesting that New York was the number one port for imports in September, again for the second month in a row. Normally it was always Los Angeles, then New York, then Long Beach. Houston's number 6. It was number 7 last year. It surpassed Norfolk, Savannah. But ports like Vancouver up 50% year over year, Oakland up 10% year over year. You could just see Los Angeles, Long Beach down 24 and 14% year over year, respectively. So this shift away from the West Coast is really noticeable.
Yeah.
But as Ari Ash from JOC said, yes, there's going to be a cooling off in import volume. A lot of talk about the import market running out of steam, as we all thought it would at some point. But he said volumes, even if they do drop significantly, will still be above 2019 levels and more like 2020 levels. So I'm interested to see how that pans out. Our data comes out on about the 10th of each month in terms of the imports, once all the bills of lading are cleared by Customs and Border Patrol, process all of the imports. So yeah, if imports are dropping, which means, but you've still got a lot of congestion, right? So you've still got lots of vessels trying to get unloaded. That means more opportunities for solutions if it's urgent freight. It's got to be somewhere for retail season. So interesting times, but we've certainly got a lot of inventory built up in warehouses that's looking for a home. I'm doing my best to buy as much stuff as I can with the deals that are out there.
Well, I was telling Jeff, I went to the mall on Monday. It was a national holiday in Toronto, and every store was 50% off. Like we walked out like bandits, but
we were
like
just
it was,
talking about that.
yeah,
we
we
were
were
just
just
talking about that with the influx of inventory from last year. They've got to get rid of it. I mean, just think about the superseded models for the ones that they had. What are they going to do with them?
Right.
Do they just write that off? Because they were expected to sell X of that of say Model A, but all of a sudden Model AB supersedes Model A, and now they got all this excess inventory that's taking up all this critical warehouse spot.
Right.
What are they going to do with it? Same with the retail. They got to do mass discounts on this to move that inventory because it costs so much money to house that, and to move that in and out. They take that, it's like forecast monthly demands in warehousing, right? You're going to take your fast movers, you're going to put that up front so you can get them staged and loaded really quick. And then the ones that don't move that fast, you put it to the back of the warehouse.
Right.
Well, the back of the warehouse is getting packed and it's still staying there. They don't have the room.
So,
they got to do this stuff.
So the thing that in the Nike annual report, it was really interesting, and not annual, quarterly earnings call, it was really interesting. Their inventory grew 65% in the first quarter of this year. Like it's up 44% year over year by the time we got to June. The one data point that got my attention, they said that their inventory challenged because some apparel arrived late and some apparel arrived early. And I think this is what we saw last year. We saw lots of volume coming into the West Coast because warehouses were full. It was moving from warehouse to warehouse to warehouse market, trying to find a home. And what we heard from shippers, they were trying to find a home for fall volumes that were late to make room for winter volumes.
Yeah.
I suspect that's still what's going on right now, where you've got different seasonal inventory stacked up in warehouses, trying to get cleared, making room. So,
well, just to add to that point,
they're charging premium rates.
Yeah, they are. And just to add to that, Dean, we were actually in discussion with Nike last year for the logistics, and the biggest problem they had last year was that their retail stores completely at capacity. They were looking for but that was a number one thing because you come on, I asked them, hey, what are you guys are looking for? And there's we're looking honestly for LTL floor loaded that we can just take away from our retail stores and put it somewhere else, because that's the issue they're having. So you're talking like a year later now to this day that they're still having this issue.
Yeah, this is why the experts in the industry on the supply chain side say that it'll take until the middle of next year for this to work its way out of the supply chain, this sort of bubble that we've got of inventory. I'd love to think it was sooner, but that's why we've been saying, first quarter of next year, maybe first half of next year, for carriers in particular, look, it'll be certainly suppressed in terms of demand. It looks like being very quiet first half of the year. No surprise there in terms of first quarter, but second quarter is normally a bit busier.
So what happens is that a lot of these retail outlets, they used to have a large mini warehouse in the back to house their inventory. But what they did was expand their floor space that took up that warehousing. So what's happening is that there's a lot of little LTL shipments because literally that trailer is a rolling warehouse. and they have many more what we call interim orders or the smaller orders throughout the week. And maybe when their inventory drops, they get a massive stock order to fill, with their warehouse at these. And you see that across many verticals. Ford Motor Company used to do that, where they had a larger warehouse in the back to keep their parts, and then it shrunk down. And then we used to send them out, 3 interim orders a week, and then 1 stock order for VOR, vehicle off the road kind of thing. And they were basically moving them. And you see that more prominent now than you ever did in the past, because of that simple reason. They're at full capacity, and they're using it's the same thing with the containers, right? Where they can't offload them, so the detention and the dwell times on these containers are longer, because they're utilizing these trailers and containers for excess warehousing space. They don't have them, and they're willing to pay for them.
Yeah, I can't help but think we end up with a lot of excess warehouse space and 53-foot vans in the next year sitting. Did you guys catch the EIA diesel number? Came out yesterday, a day late. Diesel's up.
No, I did not see that.
Wait for this. Diesel's up 38.8 cents a gallon this week.
I saw that. Yeah, I did see that around here on just regular fuel. That it rose
it's
quite a bit.
Gallon. It's bumped the fuel surcharge up 6 cents per mile this week. That's the second biggest increase since the start of the year. That alone pushed up owner-operator operating costs by about 6 cents per mile in the course of 1 week, assuming you're paying retail. But the big problem is it's $6.50 plus in California. They're having some real issues with, even the Midwest increases were fairly substantial, but California's got some big issues with diesel costs. So just when we were thinking that operating costs were coming down and we're under $2 for the first time in a long time for a long-haul operator, we get hit with diesel prices back up to $5.25 as an average. I was rejoicing in the fact I filled my truck up last week at $4.90 here in New England. But diesel prices, of course, will go back up, and because of this, retailers will be reluctant to bring them back down quickly, because this is exactly why retailers don't drop their prices as quick as the wholesale rack market does. And oil prices drop because they're worried about prices coming back up. And this, of course, early indications are that this is as a result of OPEC Plus last week deciding to cut production, which is the opposite of what we need. So there's some shenanigans going on over there in the Middle East, and that's what we're seeing here in terms of our national price this week.
Hey, I got a quick question for you, Dean. In regards to e-com, what kind of numbers you're seeing as an increase in percent or decrease? I'm going to assume that it's increasing this time over last year. What are you seeing?
When you say e-com?
E-com, yeah. E-com retailers. Do you have any numbers on shipping and numbers in that area?
Oh, I don't. I only have foot traffic numbers, how many people are visiting stores. I have nothing on the actual numbers. I know Jason Miller on LinkedIn posted something last week, but no, I've got nothing on that.
Yeah, no, I would just be curious about what those percentages are, because we are in the season, right?
Yeah.
Where a peak season, a lot of people go online and start ordering a lot of goods. I'm just curious, what those numbers are this year compared to last year at the same time, and even the previous year for 2021, this 22.
I did read yesterday, National Retail Federation, the NRF, put out their piece on Halloween. Halloween, they always do a survey each year on what people expect to spend. This year will be a record. So people are going back to normal plus in terms of their spending. So I think some of the big events will probably see better retail sales. My hope is that some of the lower pricing puts some sort of drag on inflation. So it really depends on whether those retail items are in that that basket that they measure inflation from. But that would be a good outcome from all of this heavy discounting we're seeing. But I'm not an economist, so treat that with a grain of salt. I don't know what I'm talking about when it comes to economics, but these are fun times.
Yeah, and just what Jeff was like, Dean was saying, like even I've seen it, like it's Prime Week, right? Prime Day, like yesterday and today, big days. Even I've ordered a couple boxes myself of things, waiting to track shipment on every single one of them. But I just think like it's just gonna be, we're looking at Halloween, like even I'm seeing here, like where tons of things are happening. You know, people are
Right.
getting back to doing things that forget the pandemic, right? And even something, I don't know if it's kind of a little bit off topic, but even looking at the price of like sporting ticket or event ticket pricing, like you look at Ticketmaster and the resale hub, like Kevin Hart's coming to Toronto in 2 weeks, and tickets there start at $1,000, you know, and it's like, you know, on the resale market because they buy them up and all the bots. But that's a different conversation. But people are willing because you look at, hey, if I'm going to go to a sporting event, I'm going to buy something to drink, I'm going to buy some food, I'm going to buy some merch. So that's inventory taken out from the supply chain as well, right? So, yeah, that's what I was going to say.
On related to that, my wife's catering business here in New England, they're having a record year. So they're seeing, universities, weddings, a lot of weddings and celebrations of life, were delayed. We're seeing a bit of catch up effect there. We were talking about this last night, how much of it's new organic business, and it just seems like people are doing more. So universities are doing more, they're fundraising more, they're having more events, there's more weddings, there's more parties. It just seems like there's more of that. But it's hard to know to answer Jeff's question about how it's shifted. It hasn't made a material impact on freight volumes. It's just been a shift. If you think about food services and produce volumes are down about 4 to 5% compared to this time last year. So there's less truckload volume in the market, but it's also different types of freight, right? Because during the pandemic, we had a lot of smaller consignments that were more, safety focused, a lot more plastic, a lot more airspace, a lot more packaging, bigger pallets with less product. We've certainly seen a shift away from that as people have gone back to more traditional, boxed lettuce and, fresh fruit and vegetables. It's changed the mix a bit, but volumes are down. So the one thing we did hear is that, so even though restaurant traffic is down, right?
Yeah.
Foot traffic, but produce volumes are sort of down also. Let me see if I can I've got a data point from yesterday that tells me about foot traffic at restaurants, and restaurants dining is down 2% year over year. So this is the number of people going out to eat. In the last week, it was up 1%. So it's down about 1% year over year. So essentially, you could say that that's flat. We've got the same number of people going out. When they look at iPhone data and track people, when they geofence all the restaurants, you wonder where this comes from. They geofence all the restaurants in the country with a plot on a bit of software, and when that phone's lat long crosses that geofence, it counts a visit. It's what we do in telematics when you have a truck arrive and unload at a shipper, you geofence the shipper's warehouse. When the telematics, the ELD breaks that fence, that triggers the truck's arrived. You can geofence the dock. You can see how long they're on the dock. So foot traffic data is very interesting when you look at the different types of retail outlets. But all we've got, Jeff, is that compared to this time last year, this is a really interesting data point. I couldn't figure this one out. But people that go to fitness centers are up 17%.
Let's go.
But people
I'm not part of that.
I'm part of that. Got to get ready for Christmas,
I should be, but I'm not.
And people visiting medical and health facilities are down 16%.
That's awesome. But just to add to that point, Dean, that you're saying about like restaurants, like even look at the time of the year too, right? It's very sports focused. We're in the MLB playoffs. Football is back. NHL starts tonight. NBA is starting in the next couple of weeks. So more likely, even my friends are kind of messaging, hey, let's go to a bar instead of, hey, before let's meet up at somebody's home and everybody bring a like potluck or whatever, right? So we're getting back to, hey, let's go have some wings and beer on a Tuesday night and watch the Raptors game or something.
Very interesting.
Yeah, people want to get the hell out.
Yeah, that's a good point. Sports.
Yeah, sports is definitely a big one, right? Like I know even tonight we're going to some events, but I'd love to touch on inflation on another episode because inflation, what I've been seeing here in Canada is it was really weird. Every time like we have a news station out here, they're talking about inflation. They're having economists during Thanksgiving saying, hey, go for like the dollar store option. Look for the discounted meats and discount foods. And that's an economist like talking on live TV saying that, right? And it's like everybody you talk to in Canada, I'm pretty sure it's in the States as well, that's the number one topic, is like the rising price of groceries, you know, and everything, the cost of living just going up. And just at your restaurants too, like I feel like people, even for us, there's more of a tipping culture, like tipping like your waitress and wait staff. But like even like picking up McDonald's, like McDonald's has a tip option now, and it's like we never had these options before, you know, like tipping on takeout orders and things like that. So the restaurant industry is definitely hurting on that aspect as well.
Well, I think you want to think on that real quick, Dean, that because a lot of the restaurants were closed during the pandemic, right? And you could go in there to pick up whatever. A lot of these restaurants didn't get these tips for their waiters. So what they're trying to do, the culture is now they want to repay them for staying open, the way I look at it. And so they are tipping on pickup orders where you never did that before. You know, they'd throw them a couple bucks or whatever. And I mean, you see that over and over again, no matter where you go. Even when you go to like a hibachi restaurant, we go a lot to hibachis, right? You give the waiter the tip, but now people are tipping the chef. That they're giving them money after that. I mean, it's great to see those kind of things because people have empathy and they're showing that kindness more now than ever before. I see it all the time, and it's wonderful to see.
Huh. You know, I've never been tipped unloading a freight at a shipper.
Hey, we need to do that. We need to do that. Thank you, Trucker Week. We need to start doing that.
Wait a second. An accessorial, right? Drive to assist. Come on.
Maybe we could make that a thing.
Just show up with one of those square devices, you know, and just be like, "Hey, I accept debit, credit, everything like that," and then
that's funny. That's funny as hell.
So I think that's an amazing point to kind of leave off on. Dean, thank you so much for being with us again. I know last week was really this week and coming out last week. We're always looking forward to this. I know even for mine, I've kind of clipped out some time here that I'm going to clip some clips and send it over to my customers and prospects because it's such value that you bring. Jeff, always a pleasure, brother. It's awesome to kind of bring points as well.
Thanks,
to everybody watching, we want to say, hey, thank you guys for being here this morning. If this brings any value to you at all, please like, share, comment, or send it over to somebody that you think that can benefit their day. Our replays are going to hit again at 12 and 3 p.m. Eastern time on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. Thank you, everybody. Thank you again, Dean. Thank you, Jeff. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys. See you all.
Bye-bye.
Centurion Trucking, our motto is people before profit. Today's market requires more transparency, consistency, and focus on what our clients need to win. Centurion Trucking and American Logistics are poised to help their clients achieve and surpass their targets. If you're looking for a team that honors your needs, dreams, and aspirations, then get a hold of Daman at American Logistics or Centurion.